My name is Jim Collison. We are live from the Heartland Developer Conference 2014 here in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm here with Steve Green. Steve, thanks for taking a few minutes to be with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, let's get to know you a little bit, just who you are, or who you work for, what you do, those kinds of things.
Absolutely. My name's Steve Green. I'm from Kansas City. I work for a consultancy called Oakwood Systems Group based out of St. Louis, and new offices in Kansas City and expanding rapidly. I'm a principal architect there, but I've been a developer for about 15 years now. So a lot of experience, a lot of time in the industry, a lot of changes over that time. So
Midwest kid, love to see the Kansas City Chiefs.
It's Red Friday today, so I felt
awesome.
like even though I'm not home, I should support the local cause.
No, it's looking to be a great season too.
Well, hopefully.
High hopes for the Chiefs, like we do every year. Kind of going into that. Tell me a little bit. Give us a little bit of overview about your sessions. I know you did two. You're going to pick one for me and let's talk about it.
The technical debt is good was my first session, and I've done that a couple of times, but it's an interesting topic, but it's also an interesting view on the topic. Normally, when we think about technical debt, especially as developers, we tend to think very negatively about that, that it's something bad, something always to be avoided. And I have to admit, the first time I gave the talk, it was called Technical Debt, Stop Mortgaging Your Code. It was about, we should always avoid it as devs. But what happened was a good friend of mine, Corey House, sat in on the topic, and he saw a slide that I had in there, and it talked about how, technical debt as devs, we should absolutely avoid it. We should strive for clean code, good design principles, all of those things. But there are times when technical debt can be valuable, when we're trying speed to market, when we're trying to preserve operating capital. But there are definitely business initiatives that, as developers, we don't always consider that make technical debt potentially valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so he asked me about this slide afterwards, and it was the one that stuck in his mind, and I realized that there was definitely something to that idea. So I ended up revising the presentation and came up with this idea of technical debt is good. And a couple of other interesting things happened during that, to be quite frank. Realizing that technical debt is it's not just this negative artifacts that we have in our code, but it's also a metaphor. And as a metaphor, that's a pretty interesting way to communicate with the business. They don't always understand what we as developers may say about our code and why we need to fix something or why something may not be ideal. But if we talk in terms of debt, that's something everybody understands.
Sure.
So the presentation kind of really focuses on, how do we do both of those things? When is technical debt as a negative artifact good? And potentially how do we use it as a way of communicating better amongst the business stakeholders and those who are fundamentally driving a lot of the business value decisions?
Yeah, so give me a couple, just a couple short answers on this. Why? Let's do it the first one. Why is it good? Because we don't always see it that way.
No,
so,
absolutely. It's generally good if there's probably two ways to think about it. The first is it's good if we're getting business value. So it's not just about being sloppy or trying to cut corners, but if we can justify debt as a way of getting value back, then that's positive. The second thing I would say is we have to understand that there's got to be a plan for that debt. It's not that we just incur it and then just leave it alone. We have to get value and then we have to make a plan to pay it back. And if we can do those two things, then it's absolutely valuable. We're getting something for it. A good example I gave is I used to work for digital marketing agencies, and there are oftentimes, speed to market in the marketing game is everything. And we may have a site by Gatorade who's about to launch a commercial. That site's got to launch. The business value of not hitting that site is dramatic. And the site may only live 3 months. So we can make strategic decisions about how do we get to that aggressive date faster, just by assuming what debt can we take on and what debt should we avoid.
Okay. And so there are times, I was going to ask you that question. It's funny. There are times when let me phrase it this way. Are there times when the debt just doesn't matter?
Yeah, absolutely. I did a website once for Capital One, 3-month site. Only going to live 3 months. We just knew it going in. And it's I call that interest-only debt, right, where we don't care. We're going to live with the interest. We don't care about repayment. The cost of refactoring it is not enough value.
Right.
So we just leave it alone. But then we talk about applications that are going to live 2 years. Then it's a very different question. So not just thinking about, technical debt is always bad in this vacuum, but really understanding the business context that exists around these decisions we're trying to make.
If it's short-lived, I like that what you said. If it's not, is there a plan kind of around it, how to satisfy it? There's oftentimes there's an 80-20 rule too in development where it's the first 80% is the cheapest, and then the next 20% are super expensive.
Obviously.
How does debt play in when you use these metaphors? How would you blend those two together? Does that make sense in that paradigm?
Maybe. I'm trying to think about it. One of the I have a great graph. I wish I could show it. That kind of helps a little bit with that. But the 80-20 rule, it probably makes a little bit of context when we're talking about value, but generally that 20% happens because the timelines get aggressive towards the end, or we're dealing with change management, or all of those things that generally impact our ability to deliver.
Okay. Let me ask. So you talked about communicating back. It's a value in communicating back to. Tell me, or maybe even give me some examples of where you've actually seen that work. Because I understand. I think I understand in what you're saying is the metaphor. You looking at this metaphorically really helps the end user understand. So maybe give me some examples.
Yeah, so a good example is if a developer goes up to the business stakeholder and says, hey, we need to refactor this piece of code because it doesn't meet the single responsibility principle. The business generally didn't hear anything other than blah, blah, blah time.
That's what I just heard. I was like, whoa, what does that mean?
So as devs, we have to get a little bit better about how we describe things. And I think metaphors are really powerful. And so in the talk, I try to give a lot of metaphorical examples. So for instance, trying to describe what debt may look like if you ignore it. I use the example of a really messy kitchen. So just imagine a kitchen that's a complete disaster, and there's trash everywhere, it's not organized. After a point, there becomes a time where it's really hard to do anything sufficiently complex in the kitchen, right? Like if you were to ask somebody, how would I bake a cake in this kitchen? They'd probably look at you like, it's impossible, right? There's trash everywhere. There's no way I could bake a cake in here.
So we do a massive cleanup.
Right. So we've got to clean it. And the same kind of metaphor helps people understand what they can't see in our code. Right? They don't know why it's taking us so long to deliver a feature, but if we can give these types of metaphors that say, hey, that messy kitchen over there, there's no way you would ever expect me to bake a cake. We got to fix that. And that helps them understand and relate to it a little bit better. So using those types of metaphors like debt or messy kitchen, another favorite of mine is, sometimes debt's natural, right? Just over time, debt's going to happen. A good example is responsive design. There were a point in time where we didn't care at all about responsive design. We were just building websites, and all of a sudden this idea came about, and everything that we had just built probably for the last 5 years became immediate debt, right? We'd have a whole bunch of sites that are not responsive. That's natural. There are improvements. What that means is that software gets rusty over time. And so helping the business understand that, like, I have an application that's 10 years old. Well, that's probably a rusty piece of software. We have some debt that's going to, if you ask me to go add a feature in there now, I'm going to have to really work a little harder to try to do that. Because it's just naturally over time gets rusty. So the rusty software is also a favorite. The messy kitchen, also a great one.
Yeah, I know those are some great ones. Have you ever you run across somebody who got a little didn't understand or didn't want it in metaphors? Like, tell me the way it's really supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things, so metaphors are great for quickly trying to explain the concept. One of the key points I think I make in the presentation is when we talk about debt to the business, we try to always talk about it in terms of money. Because again, the business reacts to money. They don't really react to anything else. They don't react to, newest, coolest technology, even these metaphors sometimes. But if I can say, hey, this debt's going to cost us 2 weeks later, we're gonna buy ourselves 2 weeks. But 2 weeks later, we're gonna have to figure out, some more time to solve this problem, and that's going to cost us $10,000. Are we willing to accept a $10,000 piece of debt? The business can react to that. They can say, yes, $10,000 is well within the business value we're getting back now. Let's go for that.
And that would be an actual. When you're saying that, you're not making that up. It's an actual $10,000.
Yeah. So a big part of identifying your debt and making it transparent is not only saying, hey, we've got it, but estimating it. Saying this is what it's going to take to fix it later. And then we can actually derive a dollar value and really talk about it in concrete terms.
Have you had any business units start to poke fun at the metaphor? When you use them, they start to poke fun at them, and they use them in weird contexts. Well, it's have you had that happen too?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people just steal the metaphor and start using. I hear business people talking about technical debt, and you're like, what?
But it's a new buzzword they don't really understand. You're like, I was just trying to make it easy for you.
Exactly. I didn't want to say single responsibility principle. No, that happens quite often, actually. Awesome, especially not even business stakeholders, but sometimes like project managers or business analysts. All of a sudden, you hear them using the metaphor. But I think that's also positive because it does spark questions. And like I said, debt can be something that everybody understands, and they understand, hey, it's good that I can go into debt to buy my house, but it's bad that I max out every credit card I got. So, just putting those simple terms, they can at least talk about it.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one, you just heard blah, blah, blah ton, right? And you're like, I don't even know how to engage with that.
Yeah. I just know we have some tech terms, and it's funny to hear end users sometimes, and they'll often do this, my is the problem or whatever, and it's just kind of funny that way. Talk a little bit about some of the questions you get during your session.
Well, I think over time, the biggest one that I continually get is, as developers, we generally love to refactor. We know that, we can always improve our software, and we're trying to do that just as professionals. And so the big problem that everybody has is, how do I sell it? How do I sell or refactor to my business?
Right.
And so I spend a lot of time trying to focus on the metaphor as a cooperative thing, right? That the solution is not just the developer's responsibility; it's the business's responsibility too, and that we engage them in that conversation. So, it's not a sell job; it's we actively having a collaboration about what we're willing to refactor later and what we're not. A lot of it too is just trying to change our mentality as devs. A lot of times devs think, very binary, right? It's either right or it's wrong. It's either dead or it's not dead. And the business likes this weird sense of gray. So just helping them a little bit with that and meeting them halfway goes a long way to getting them to say, okay, now Steve, you can go and refactor that over there to make life a little bit easier.
Yeah, what would you say to devs who are, who have to live in a world of gray on these? Because you can't always fix things you want. Any advice, anything you picked up along the way of talking to the devs about saying, hey, not everything. Is there a time?
Yeah.
When you just go bankrupt?
Use that
terminology?
No, absolutely. It's fantastic. The metaphor can be fully extended.
Yeah,
absolutely. Both questions. One, there's definitely times where it's just bankrupt. The Rusty software solution is a great one. If it's 10 years old at this point, think about it. We've probably got MVC. We have new JavaScript libraries that are probably not being used. You probably have dependency injection. There's 100 things where you're like, we just need to start over. It's just not worth it anymore.
Just declare bankruptcy and let's start over. Yeah.
But devs definitely have that problem. One of the things that I wish I could talk a little bit more about is, how do we build a culture where it's okay to talk about our debt as devs? And, one of my favorite ways to do it is to do it in a code review. My favorite way to start a code review is, tell me something you're proud of, tell me something you're ashamed of. What you're really trying to get to do is the devs to get comfortable showing, hey, okay, this passes a functional test, it works, but it really is kind of dead. We really do need to identify this as something that we would go back and refactor. And as a lead dev or an architect, I think it's important to show that you're not infallible, right? That you show off your own debt, and it becomes a culture of this is okay.
Sure.
Devs generally get kind of nervous because we're often looked at as the ones who have to have all the answers, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to know exactly how it works, and if a dev doesn't know how it works or is tinkering with it and isn't 100% sure about the solution, we get real nervous about it. So creating a culture where that's okay to talk about, I think, is really important just inside the dev team itself. Yeah.
Well, that's a good example you used there, showing something good, showing something bad, and that it's not just all about hey, show me show me what's bad. What else would you wish, that goes very, very quickly. Anything else you wish you could get in? 45 minutes goes fast.
It is absolutely fast.
What else would you tell somebody,
I think just strategies for helping the dev team cope with this. This is not something that devs generally do naturally. We don't talk to the business naturally. It's not something that we generally think of. So finding more ways to create those cultures where that's okay and involving the business more. I wish I had more time to do some more of those scenarios where we could actually dive into concrete examples of things that I've seen in the past and how we.
Give me one of those. What do you think? What's the top one that comes to mind?
Gatorade's my favorite one to talk about, just because I was a technical architect for Gatorade for quite some time, and the marketing department at Gatorade, and high demands, and generally. Generally trying to do that. Kind of a tangent to that, but we talk about it a little bit in the talk, is Gatorade used to come to me and always say, we want something innovative. We need to push the envelope. You have to innovate. And to me as a dev, I'm sitting there like, what does innovation really even mean? I don't really know what they think, because I know what I think is innovative, and I'm pretty sure what Gatorade marketing thinks is innovative is not innovative. And quickly realizing that this mindset of being able to release quickly and then refactor and go back was really an important concept of how we do that and how we do it well. So showing kind of how that worked through that process and really fundamentally gaining the business's trust. I think that goes a long way. When you're willing to go halfway and understand their problem and solve their problem and give them options and not just think it's black and white, it goes a long way to building trust. And then once that trust exists, then they're much more willing to say, okay, Steve really said that this is important, and we really need to focus on it. The credit card authorization needs to be refactored. I think we need to deal with that.
Well, and I think you have to have a history of results to gain that trust, right? You can't. Sometimes we want to go back and we want to go back and we want to go back and eventually we got to cut some code.
Right. We got to release.
Give them something to do. Anything else along those lines you want to share?
No, it's one of my favorite talks I do. It normally gets a lot of attention when you stand up and say technical debt is good, so it's always kind of fun to poke that a little bit.
If you went into a financial conference and said debt is a good thing, people would be like,
what are you talking about?
What are you talking about? So, but I love that metaphor. I hadn't heard it that way before, but now that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's interesting how many of in that metaphor, in the line of that, how many of those things work or how much they relate to the financial world. So
absolutely.
That's very cool. Speaking of Gatorade, have you seen the latest Gatorade advertisement with Peyton Manning and Cam Newton?
I have. It's fantastic. It's very, very good.
That is awesome.
They know what they're doing.
love those guys over at Gatorade, and they got some good stuff going on. Steve, thanks for taking a few minutes.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Come out here. I appreciate it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Definitely.
Don't take off yet.